Thank you for coming, and at our last ADA board meeting, we discussed a lot of issues in the legislature, and I've submitted testimony probably 60 times, I think, not all of them for ADA this year. One of the issues that we tried to stay away from because we wanted to hold it to this meeting was housing. And we have a special guest with us this morning, this evening, I should say, to be able to do that. I'm proud to say he's a graduate of the Iolani School, also a graduate of Harvard College, I think undergraduate, correct?
Yeah.
University. Harvard Law School, came back to be my city councilman, which I was very pleased at. Ran for Congress, was hoping that would work out a little bit better for him, but nonetheless, then served on our own ADA board of directors for a while, and then is now in the state senate. So please welcome Stanley Chang.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Bickle, who was a very capable speech and debate judge back in the back in the 90s when I was at Iolani. It's great to see a lot of old friends and new friends here today. I think among this room is probably responsible for like at least 50% of the testimony received by the legislature. So you guys are the most prolific and the most active and engaged subset, I think, of the entire population of the state of Hawaii. So it's awesome that you guys are all making your voices heard. And it's an honor to be talking about my affordable housing plan, especially with Mr. Bickle, because in some ways I thought about this like a debate case. And you know, the background is, so like we all know that our housing shortage, our affordable housing shortage, has been a big issue for many, many years. As long as I've been alive, certainly, and probably a lot longer than that, right? And you know, politicians have come and gone, governors, mayors, you know, city council members, state senators, and I haven't heard anyone propose a plan that would actually solve the problem, which is what debaters are required to do in high school, right? And you know, people will propose things that will nibble at the edges, or you know, will make marginal improvements, but none that will actually solve the problem. And as a result, I feel like things are not going to get better, right? They're just not. We just had an election for governor. Out of the three major candidates, all three of which were, you know, bright people, Ige, Hanabusa, and Tupola, not one of them, again, had a proposal that would actually even purport to solve housing, even pretend to solve housing, the housing shortage. So I was troubled by this, and I think it's the #1 issue facing Hawaii. And so I wanted to learn about how other jurisdictions that had solved the problem did it, which is kind of what you do, right? And so in Hawaii, our instinct is to look to the mainland. And I looked to the mainland, and in California, they have probably even worse housing shortages than we do here in Hawaii, right? And they're doing all of these things which are, I don't think, suitable for Hawaii's climate. For instance, there's a YIMBY movement that just wants to steamroll the NIMBYs and just get rid of them, right? And I don't think that's right, and I don't think that's politically even possible in Hawaii. It turns out there are a couple of jurisdictions around the world that have solved the housing shortage, right? And the ones that are really well known are Singapore and Vienna, Austria. So I actually went to both of them, and they were really fascinating because they were actually opposite models. Singapore, well, let's start with Vienna. So when I say public housing, every American sort of thinks of the same model, right? Which is highly subsidized rentership, right? When I say public housing, you immediately think of a highly subsidized rental unit, right? That's the American European model for many, many generations. And that's the Viennese model. The only difference, though, between the Viennese model and what we have in America, pretty much, is that they produce enough supply to meet demand. So in Hawaii, in America, we think public housing is scarce. We have to give it to the people who need it the most, right? And that's wrong. We have to give it to everybody, okay? and this is where it kind of gets hard for people to comprehend in America, but the Department of Education does not ask how much money you make when you want to send your kid to public school. Right? The Department of Transportation does not ask how much money you make when you want to get on the highway. The Parks and Recreation Department does not ask how much money you make when you enter a school, or when you enter a park. Right? These are public services, and housing should be a public service, just like all of these things, just like, I think the left in the United States is currently trying to make healthcare. Housing, I think, is equally critical, and housing should also equally be available to everybody, rich and poor alike. And so that's the Viennese model. Now, the problem with the Viennese model is you need a big subsidy. And as much as it would be great to tax and spend our way to, this big subsidy, the constitutional amendment that proposed to raise property taxes to fund education crashed and burned. 70% of people voted against it in Hawaii. And I just don't think that it's politically realistic to do a massive taxpayer subsidy to do housing. All right, so that takes us to Singapore. Singapore is actually the opposite of the Viennese model. It is unsubsidized ownership. But it's also really successful, again, because it has the same magic ingredient that Vienna does. Enough supply to meet demand. All right. So this whole plan that we have developed based on the Singaporean model is designed to achieve this principle. Enough supply to meet demand, but to do so in a politically acceptable way, in a politically realistic way. All right. There are a couple of ways to get supply to match demand. One is the probably libertarian, conservative, Republican model, which is deregulate land use. Build anything, anywhere, anytime. Right? That's like the Houston model. Right? That would result in paving over all the agricultural land in Hawaii, conservation land, etc. Right? I do not think that whether or not we think that that's good or bad, that is not an outcome that the voters of Hawaii are likely to accept, right? If I sat down with an industry group and they were like, we need to do what Alabama does, what Houston does, we need to make it easier to build. And my response was, I would be happy to introduce the bills to abolish the Land Use Commission, to get rid of zoning, to do Houston, to do laissez-faire everything. But I guarantee you that I will be crucified, and every single member of the legislature will be, the Capitol building will burn down before that bill gets a hearing. Right? It is not politically realistic to deregulate land use. So you have the opposite model, right? And this is probably the leftist socialist model, which is massive government intervention to build that new supply. Why do we need massive government intervention? Because it's not just environmentalists who are preventing the creation of new supply. There are actually a number of different objections to new supply, right? There's the environmental objection of do not pave over any more agricultural or conservation land. There's also the taxpayers' objection of we do not want to subsidize anything. There's also the objection of no more growth, period, right? There's already too many crowds, too much traffic, too many tall buildings, too much noise, too much congestion. Okay, I don't think that that position is a majority, or even a very large minority, even though we probably all hear it all the time. I think it's a relatively small minority, and the reason I think that is because when I ask people who are truly I think truly anti-growth, I ask them, do you want your kids to be able to live here? They seem to say yes. They all say yes, which implies some level of growth that's not zero or negative. A second group of people would say, and this is like a really important one, is you're blocking my view. Yeah. And a lot of people, I was in the city council for 4 years. That is, out of all the testimony of the city council, probably 85% of it was some variation of that. And the reason why those bills pass in the city council, despite all of that opposition, is because for any given project, no matter how monumental it might be, only a small percentage of the island is going to have their views blocked, right? So that is also not a majority of the people of Hawaii, in my opinion. What I do think is a majority of the people of Hawaii is this third objection, which I hear all the time, and which is one of the key issues that we're going to address through our Singaporean model, and that is wealthy investors from overseas. If we build more supply, it is going to be snapped up by wealthy investors from overseas. We're going to leave it empty. It's going to be snapped up by investors who are going to rent it out to Airbnb. It is not going to go to local people, right? And regardless of what we think the merits are of these like that attitude among the voters, in the private sector they say, right, the customer is always right. In the public sector, the voter is always right. Right? We're not going to, we cannot educate the voter. Well, we can try, but usually fail. At the end of the day, if the voter believes, that caravans of rapists are invading this country from the southern border, they are going to elect a president who tells them that, right? No matter how absurd it might be. So regardless of whether you think these arguments have merit, on a political level, we have to give the voter what they want. Otherwise, we are all going to be defeated, and anything that we pass will be reversed in the next legislature. Okay, so we have a very elaborate plan to create a lot of supply. And there are many moving parts to get to each of these potential objections, all right? And it's very complicated, and there are a lot of different parts, so I've tried to make it as easy as possible, and I don't think I've achieved that, but I've tried to do an acronym, which is ALOHA, right? Everyone's favorite word in Hawaii. And what ALOHA stands for is affordable, locally owned homes for all. And each of these elements is essential to overcome these legitimate objections, in my opinion, that the voters of Hawaii have to new housing supply, to massive new housing supply. All right, so let's walk through each of them. A is affordable, all right? So a lot of people are gonna say, new housing supply is not affordable. I can't afford it, right? And that's, we see the Kaka'ako luxury towers going up, and a lot of people say that is not affordable, right? That does not count as new supply because I can't afford it, or no one I know can afford it. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're going to price these units at $300,000. $300,000. Now, I understand a lot of people will still say that's not affordable, right? I can't afford that. A lot of people, even if we price these units at $10,000, a lot of people will still say that's not affordable, we can't afford it. So we have to set the bar somewhere. And I think $300,000 sounds relatively low. I think it's also realistic to do on a cost, like a construction cost, perspective as well. All right, so it turns out that if you do $300,000 for a 2-bedroom unit, and which, like I said, I think is realistic from a construction cost standpoint, and you do a 5% down payment, of which there are many existing federal programs to achieve, HUD says that that unit is affordable to a family of 4 at the 53% of AMI level, of area median income level. Okay, that's really low. All the existing affordable housing or whatever, the reserved units and so forth that you hear about in Kaka'ako, they're building at 140% of the area median income, 100%, 120%, some go down to 80%. Some go down to 60%. There was a proposal at my, when I was on the city council to do city subsidized affordable housing at 60% of AMI. This is even lower than that, right? So that's pretty low. Again, a family of 4 making 53% of AMI is $64,000 a year, which a lot of people are not making that, I understand, but that means if there's a mom and a dad and 2 kids, or 2 parents and 2 kids, each parent is making $32,000 a year on average, which, again, I understand a lot of people are not making that either, but you're now within the realm of, school teachers, bus drivers, nurses, people who are the working class in this country. So that's what affordable is. But remember, it has to be affordable not just to the buyer, not just to the resident, but also to the taxpayer. Taxpayers don't want to pay more taxes. We saw that, right? So this is going to require no subsidy, 0 subsidy, okay? All of the costs of construction are going to be recouped through this $300,000 price. Okay, this is not a subsidized unit. Okay, there's no taxpayer subsidy. All right. L, local. This is a big one. So in Hawaii, right, you often hear, well, let's take care of our local people, but foreign investors, outsiders, I don't want that, right? And just as an aside, I think if Donald Trump came to Hawaii and promised to build a wall around Hawaii and no new immigration into Hawaii, I think that would be really popular among the population of Hawaii. and it's kind of it's cognitive dissonance that I guess we have to live with. But again, we have to give the voters what they want. Local people only. So what does local mean? 3 things. Hawaii resident, who is an owner-occupant and owns no other real property. That is a local person, okay? So even if you're not a Hawaii resident, just those last 2 things alone, you are an owner-occupant and you own no other real property, I think that pretty much excludes all foreign investors, right? So who would be somebody in that category who's not a Hawaii resident? Maybe a student, a full-time student. And I think most people in Hawaii are probably okay with a full-time student, right? Even if they're not from Hawaii. So again, those are the 3 criteria. And so people in Hawaii are going to be very parent, and absolutely no outsiders, right? So okay, here, I get that. Absolutely no outsiders, right? How are you going to enforce that? I'll tell you. It's the year 2019. This is the easiest thing in the world to enforce nowadays. With face recognition technology, retina scans, fingerprint scans, I can be 100% sure that John Bickle, his face has passed through the lobby of this building on at least 270 separate days of the year. And I can be 100% sure that John Bickle has touched his thumb to this scanner on his doorknob on 270 separate days of the year. And I can also be 100% sure that not John Bickle, that John Bickle's Airbnb tenant, that his face is not in the database as it passes through the lobby. And I can be 100%, I can screen that tenant 100%, right? We can enforce owner occupancy with extreme levels of certainty in 2019. Now, I think that's a little Big Brother-ish. I'm personally not comfortable with that, but I think the voter of Hawaii is going to demand 100% enforcement owner occupancy, which I think we can do, like I said. All right, the third, O, is ownership, okay? Locally owned. What does this mean? It means a 99-year lease, okay? Actually, out of all the different policy issues with this bill, this is currently the stickiest, 99-year lease. I think 99 years is very important because that will take every single person to the end of their natural life. Where we can be 100% sure that anyone buying a unit, any adult buying the unit, 18 and up, is never going to have to move again. They will have security, right? Now, there's other groups, state agencies, OHA for instance, they don't want 99-year leases, they want 75-year leases. I don't think 75-year leases achieve that, right? You could be graduating from college at age 21, buy a unit, plus 75 years, you're 96. There are a lot of people who live past 96 these days. So I don't think a 75-year lease is appropriate. Now, but 99 years is long enough to, to give you peace of mind, and so you never have to move again. All right, so a lot of people in America are going to say, wait a minute, 99 years, that's not infinity, right? And what's going to happen after that 99 years? My response is I have a few responses. One of which, it's kind of funny, no other policy at state or federal or local government is expected to foresee into 99 years into the future. So it's kind of interesting that we have this burden to predict what the world is going to be like in 99 years. But the second issue is, here's how it works in Singapore. In a functioning, or even Vienna, where supply meets demand, you don't need to have a property being passed generation to generation. Okay, what happens in Singapore is, family lives in the unit, kid gets married, wants to move out, and they are able to buy a new unit, right? And then so they buy their new unit because again, supply is being provided to meet all of the demand. They have their new unit. All the kids are out of the house. They have their new units. When they have kids, their kids move out and buy new units, and there is no longer a need for that unit to pass down generation to generation, right? Because all kids and grandkids and into the future are going to have their own units. So there's no need to pass that unit down generation to generation. And that's why, that's why it's like, it's a little bit, there's a lot of explanation. All right, that's O for ownership. H, homes. Okay, this is another objection that we hear a lot. We don't want micro units, you can't raise a family in a micro unit and so forth. I get all of that. These are going to be homes. They're not going to be warehouses for people. They're not going to be shoe boxes in the sky. Right? These are going to be 2-bedroom. In Singapore, they don't even have a studio unit. Their smallest is a 1-bedroom. And I think that's a great policy, right? These should be units that are large enough or have enough bedrooms to house a family. They don't have to be huge, right? 600 square feet, 700 square feet, I think is very realistic for a 2-bedroom in this day and age. In a lot of major cities in the world, that's like a luxurious amount of square footage for a 2-bedroom. And they're gonna have amenities, okay? We're talking about swimming pools, we're talking about community gardens, we're talking about all these great amenities. Now, unlike a luxury unit in Kaka'ako, which might have one swimming pool for every 400 units or 300 units, we'd probably have to have one swimming pool for every 4,000 units, right? But that's what gets the cost down to a level that you are able to, offer at a low price of $300,000, and cover all the construction costs within that $300,000 cost. They're also going to have schools. I mean, everything, right? If you're building at this level, you have to provide these amenities for people. You can't just build 10,000 units and then without schools, right? All right. The last A, and this is really the critical one. Okay, this is for all. This is not for the people who need it the most. Okay, this is not for the formerly homeless. This is not for any special category. This is for absolutely everybody. Okay, absolutely everybody. All right. So even in Vienna and Singapore, they have a means test. They only apply the means test at the very beginning, though. So if you make more money afterwards, no problem. I would not even want a means test at the beginning. Absolutely no means testing whatsoever. All right. Let me explain this on a political level. All right, does anyone want to guess the top 3 programs at the federal budget by dollars spent?
Medicare?
Medicare is number 1, Social Security is number 2, and number 3 is?
Medicaid?
No, defense.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Social Security, Medicare, and defense together comprise a large majority of the federal budget. Okay? What do these 3 programs have in common? They are for everybody. Right? There's no means testing for Social Security, Medicare, or defense. They are for everybody. Okay? Even Donald Trump collects Social Security as a Medicare beneficiary. And that's why even Donald Trump and most Republicans, even Donald Trump has pledged never to cut Social Security, Medicare, and defense. Right? Now there are some politicians who come along every once in a while and do want to cut a couple of those. I mean, Paul Ryan, right, prominently wanted to cut Medicare and Social Security. Where's Paul Ryan today and where's Donald Trump today? Even among Republicans, it turns out that this universality is really popular. Okay? So I don't know exactly what the true definition of socialism is, but I know that giving benefits to 3% of the population, which is basically our existing affordable housing policy, giving benefits to the small minority is not socialism. That is the opposite of socialism. Socialism is for everybody. And socialism, as it turns out, is really popular. Right? Even Social Security, Medicare, and defense, the 3 most socialist parts of the federal budget, are the 3 most popular parts of the federal budget. All right. So, put it this way. Let's say Pierre Omidyar or some other extremely wealthy person wanted to move into one of these units. I would say that is a sign that this program is working. It is not, the rich mooching off anybody, because remember, these units are all unsubsidized. Everyone is paying their own way in every one of these units. That would be a sign that the program has succeeded. If really rich people want to live alongside, bus drivers and the, pharmacists at the 53% of AMI level, isn't that what we want as a society? Isn't that a good thing? I mean, we certainly think it's a good thing when it happens in our public schools, when it happens in our universities, and in our parks, and so on. All right. So how are we going to achieve all of these elements? And this is very controversial. I understand this is probably, this is going to take a lot more explaining. But the short answer is really high density. Okay? And by really high density, what do I mean? 250 units an acre. Okay, what do I mean by that? Has everyone been past 801 South Street? Does anyone know, everyone kind of has an idea of what 801 South Street looks like? Okay, that's 4 acres, 2 towers, 500 units per tower, roughly, and So about 1,000 units overall, that is about 250 units an acre. But actually, 801 South Street doesn't even max out its density because if you do, maybe you can tell, there's actually 2 parking structures on 801 South Street. And I would not envision, basically we have a building code today that requires 1 parking per bedroom, okay? I would say let's cut that by 90%. Maybe 1 parking stall per every 10 bedrooms or something, and give them to, ride share, whatever, car share, whatever. And give this incredible amount of density. All right, so in Hawaii, we also have this idea, the voter of Hawaii thinks that this is an idyllic tropical paradise with no tall buildings, okay? Right, that's false, right? We have the 4th most skyscrapers in the entire United States right here in Honolulu, okay? New York is way ahead of number 1, Chicago is way ahead of number 2. LA only has 40 more than Honolulu, and Honolulu, in gross numbers, has more skyscrapers than San Francisco, Seattle, Denver, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Miami, Washington, D.C., Boston, Minneapolis, all of these cities that we think of as larger than Honolulu, okay? And, I remember going to college for the first time in Boston and looking at the skyline and I was like, this is it, right? If you look at the Honolulu from Tantalus, right, there's a forest of skyscrapers. A lot of them are hotels, a lot of them are apartments and condos, And if you have mainland friends, or if you know a lot of people on the mainland, Americans do a lot of things. One thing that Americans do not do is they do not live in high-rises. I think in Hawaii we probably all know multiple people who live in high-rises. Maybe some of us do live in high-rises, right? But on the mainland, nobody, very, very, the percentage of the American population that lives in a high-rise is very, very, very small, right? But those 801 South Street towers are 47 stories tall, and even on Manhattan, even in Hong Kong, even in Tokyo, a 47-story tall residential tower is really quite tall. There are not that many of them on Manhattan. And that is my explanation to you of how, actually, in Hawaii, we are very comfortable and familiar with density because it doesn't faze us that 801 South Street exists with its 47 stories. All right, so with that level of density, all it would take are 7 parcels, and I listed them out, and I would have to look at them again, but we're talking about parcels like the 100-acre Aloha Tower site, the 16-acre OCCC site, several high schools on the island. And if you develop them, say, again, 100 acres, Aloha Stadium, 50 towers, okay, you could put 25,000 units just on the Aloha Stadium site alone. Okay? Now, according to DBED, we have a housing shortage between the years 2015 and 2025 of 65,000 units. Okay, so if we're going to close that gap, if our demand is about 6,000 units a year and we're only getting from the existing supply maybe 1,000, 2,000 units a year, we need to triple our residential construction pipeline a year. And that thousands of units every single year, if we are not going to touch agricultural and conservation land, they have to be done with extreme density, with really high density, places like Aloha Stadium. Okay, so again, 50 towers, Aloha Stadium, that's the kind of level of density that we're talking about here. Another few key elements of this program, again, designed to mitigate the concerns of the voters. All right, another huge issue in Hawaii, okay, is that the voters of Hawaii have a very visceral opposition to the idea that I can buy one of these reserved units in Kaka'ako, in one of these towers, and then I can flip it for a big windfall profit a few years later. In Hawaii, people hate that. That is, people flip out about that, right? Now, actually in Singapore, you have the same issue. You have people flipping into the secondary market for big windfall profits. The reason it's okay in Singapore, primarily in my opinion, is because again, supply meets demand. So everyone gets that chance to buy and flip. So there's no issue of inequity, right? There's no issue of a lucky small 3% of the population or whatever who is able to do it. But I understand that is probably, I'm not going to be able to educate the voters on this, okay? We have to give the voter what they want. So what does the voter want? They don't want windfall profits. All right, I have the solution for you. Every single sale on the secondary market, every single time it trades hands, not just the first time, second time, third time, the 10th time, the 20th time, if there's any price appreciation, 75% of that profit goes to the state, every single time. every single time. There will never be a windfall profit on these units. They will never appreciate dramatically in value. Well, they will appreciate dramatically in value. They just, the profit won't go to the seller. The profit will go to the state. Now, this is actually going to, kill two birds with one stone. So not only are we preventing the windfall profits problem, but as the owners, the residents of these kind of aging high-rise towers know, right? With aging high-rise towers, you get huge maintenance issues, right? Very, very expensive maintenance issues. And a lot of the folks who are, in these towers and these high-rises with fixed incomes, they can't just write a check for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, right? So I think this fund, the 75% fund, can be used to pay for the maintenance of these buildings, both that kind of large scale, spalling concrete or whatever, but also the day-to-day, cleaning up and making sure the trash is always picked and making sure that there are, police officers and, that kind of thing that are just kind of on patrol at all times, right? So we're gonna do maintenance, we're gonna do great maintenance. It's gonna be beautiful, right? It's gonna be very, very nice, okay? All right, so I think I've covered a lot of the ground so far, but again, just to review, we have this program. It's a 41-page bill, but all of the elements in this bill, right? The 75% thing, the availability to all thing, the redeveloping existing state-owned lands thing, all of it is to simply overcome all of the legitimate objections that the voters of Hawaii have raised to no new supply that have created this huge housing shortage in the first place. All right, so why do I think this is important? Okay, so one of the background assumptions that we all have in Hawaii, that we kind of all have in the United States for the most part, is population growth, okay? And a lot of people in Hawaii just aren't comfortable with the idea of population growth. And my response, you'll often hear, the population has doubled in just the last 40 years or whatever. And my response to that is, okay, I understand that population growth is unpopular. But let me tell you, one thing that's something that is even less popular than population growth is population decline.
Yeah.
Okay? There are places around the world and around this country where there is population decline, right? Japan in 1992 had 2.1 million high school seniors, 18-year-olds. Today it has 1.1 million. Okay? If population trends continue in Japan, this is a civilization that will cease to exist. Okay? And it's not just Japan. Virtually every modern nation in the world, all of Western Europe basically, most of Asia, including China, which is not that wealthy a nation, fertility rates have crashed. Okay? America, Canada, Australia are just a few of the countries that are wealthy that do still have population growth. And it's not because, actually, America's fertility rate has now gone below its replacement rate. The only reason America has population growth is because of immigration. Okay? So, Japan doesn't have immigration. Most Western European countries are very uncomfortable with the idea of immigration. Right? But America, we still have immigration, our population is still growing. But even in America, if you go to Detroit, Cleveland, New Orleans, Baltimore, I was talking with a gentleman from Baltimore. Baltimore, the city of Baltimore, the city, not the suburbs, the city was built